We're glad to have you back. The recent introduction of a 0.5% cybersecurity levy in Nigeria has sparked a wave of reactions among the populace. Nigerians from all walks of life have expressed their concerns and opinions on this development, highlighting the potential implications it may have on their daily lives and the economy as a whole. Many citizens feel that government should focus more on economic issues, like existing economic issues, before imposing additional financial obligation on the people. Meanwhile, members of the House of Representatives have demanded that the CBN temporarily withdraws the circular instructing banks to start implementing the policy. Well, let's get more perspective on this. I'm being joined by senior researcher, policy analyst with Budget Nigeria, Mr. Viola Kwaga. Good afternoon, Mr. Kwaga. Thank you for joining the program.
Good afternoon, Tolu. As always, delighted to be here.
Well, let me go straight to the point, since you can hear me now. Government has continued to increase or reintroduce some series of taxes. Now, the latest is the cybersecurity levy. What's your reaction to this? Let's start on that note.
For one, there seems to be a disconnect between the ultimate purposes of government to provide goods and services within a stable economic environment and the needs of the government to shore up its revenue. There was the creation of a committee on tax reforms that was aiming to reduce the number of taxes to single digits. So seeing this 0.5% levy being imposed on Nigerians, though with exceptions, seemed to show some serious disconnect in the sense that not only is inflation ravaging the average earnings of Nigerians, but other macro and political problems such as security, such as instability in the exchange rates, have really caused serious damage on the lives and livelihoods of Nigerians. So hearing this and seeing how it was intended to be implemented is actually a shocker. More to the point, the problem with the federal government, and I think Nigerian governments at almost all levels, is not just with a desire to raise or shore up revenue, but with the revenue that you have, how transparent are you? How well is it used in terms of the implementation of projects? And how well have those projects even helped the lives and livelihoods of Nigerians? We haven't really seen much in that regard. And as a matter of fact, the budget implementation report for 2023, the full year 2023, I think as we speak today, is not yet out. So we are not sure how the 2023 budget was spent and the supplementary budget, or at least part of it that was spent up until, I think, 2024.
Well, that's really deep. Getting taxes from Nigerians, and they don't see development. We can mention some states that are doing pretty well when it has to do with tax monies and what you do with it, because you really need to make it easy and voluntary for people to want to pay tax. Let's stay a bit with that. How do you think governments can earn the people's confidence with regards to usage of funds judiciously, particularly at this time where every arm of government is complaining about low funds, not much funds to be spent? What do you think can be done to win that confidence back the masses?
Really asked an interesting question, and I'd like to start from the perspective of the private sector. If you look at previous budget implementation reports and revenue reports of the federal government, you'll see that a large part of revenue appears to be coming from the private sector. I think the FIRS chairman in recent months has mentioned just how has been coming from the private sector. So we have CIT, we have value-added tax as components of the broader components of the broader revenue of the federal government. So with that in mind, the government ought to be as clear, as transparent, and as timely with its communication as possible. Shoring up or improving tax morale or tax compliance involves, I think, two fundamental things. One, your communication must be clear, it must be accurate, it must be timely, and it must also allow for feedback. One thing I've noticed at almost all levels of governance in Nigeria or government in Nigeria is there really is much of an exchange in terms of feedback from citizens to government. So you have a project being implemented in your community, there's a policy being implemented, nationwide. What are the parameters to test for citizens' engagement and uptake, with these projects or with these government policies? That's on the one hand. On the other, actual demonstration in terms of tangible benefits. Government agencies need to design their projects, whether they be education projects, whether they be health projects, water and sanitation, infrastructure, security. There has to be a sense that they are reporting to the people. Ordinarily, the people's representatives are the ones that should be having these conversations, i.e., the National Assembly, both the Senate and the House, and the state houses of assembly at the state level. But far too often, these engagements between the state houses of assembly, or rather, let me start with the federal, with the National Assembly, they tend to be sort of without any real purpose and goal, in the sense of we do not really feel like they are coming to these conversations with evidence, with facts, with data, or to question the federal government on the evidence, facts, and data that a particular intervention has worked. Have you reduced maternal mortality? By how much? And what does the evidence say? Have you reduced the number of out-of-school children? By how much? What does the evidence say? How much money have you spent on these interventions? And that's where you tie value for money with this, this conversation about demonstrating the impact of government interventions. You cannot have a system that appropriates money, that releases money, and does not audit that money, and does not speak to value for which the money is spent. And this brings me to the issue of audits. At the end of the day, when the Auditor General has written his reports, is there any law? Is there any rule? Is there any guideline mandating the National Assembly to publish that audit report within 3 months of it being presented to them? I don't know if Nigerians are aware. Yes, the Auditor General is mandated to carry out, checks on federal government accounts, which are not in-depth audits in and of themselves, but he's mandated to carry out checks. That's a fact. However, the National Assembly is under no obligation to publish the report submitted to them by the Auditor General to the public. So the National Assembly has a large expanse of time before it publicizes the audit report, which is why I don't know if Nigerians really notice, but audit reports tend to come out 3-4 years after a particular administration has left office. So who are you going to hold accountable for monies that were spent 3-4 years ago? The National Assembly needs to demonstrate that it is assertive enough to call the executive to order as a means to demonstrate to Nigerians that.
All right, let's take a break. And when we come back, I'm sure we'll have Mr. Kwaga back and we'll continue this conversation. This is Business Nigeria with Tolulokwe Ogunjobi. All right, glad to have you back. I have Mr. Vaya Kwaga back there speaking more about issues around the cybersecurity levy and other economic issues. Yes, great. I think it's better now. I would follow up with the fact that Nigerians are already contending with series of hikes. Electricity tariffs for Band A users is so much on the high side. Fuel prices, energy prices, and all of that. What happens to purchasing power? We've not heard anything about minimum wage or whether government is going to increase it and what that will also mean for inflation. A lot of issues all in one box. Can you help us understand it?
Yeah, great question. Very broad implications. The question about purchasing power, the question about minimum wage, the question about an increase in tariffs for a particular band all revolve around the productivity of the economy and the way in which the business of government is run. So, looking at the issue of electricity generation, it's a fact that the capacity, the installed capacity, both from GenCos down to the DISCos themselves, is insufficient to supply the electricity needs of Nigerians. So, there needs to be some serious investment in terms of infrastructure. The past president, Muhammadu Buhari, and President Tinubu himself have gone to great lengths, to decentralize the electricity regime. And if the Electricity Act, as is amended, and subsidiary legislation are implemented as they should, then we should actually see a level of improvement as far as the governance is concerned, because states are allowed to generate their own electricity right now. But what is needed is serious investment. And the question then becomes, will that investment come from this government? The advice of the Bretton Woods institutions has been to remove the subsidies, in electricity to allow for private sector players to come in. Now that's fine. That would work in a system where there already is some level of infrastructure that exists, and the governance regime would allow this capital to find, the right form of investments and to find infrastructure that can supply this electricity where it's generated, transmit it where it is transmitted from where it's generated, and distribute it to the end users. But unfortunately, the electricity being supplied is very, very minimal. And even for businesses, time and time again, when they are surveyed, when they are, asked questions about some of their greatest challenges, energy remains at the top. So Nigerians would prefer to have a demonstration that the electricity is even being supplied at a steady rate prior to when these hikes are being implemented. I don't think any rational Nigerian would have a problem in requiring him or her to pay more as far as the service is there, as far as he or she's being supplied with electricity. Looking at the minimum wage conversation, again, this is one about inflation. And this is a testament to how badly the economy has been managed for years. The problem of minimum wage is essentially a problem of inflation. Because if you look back as at when, say, 2000, what was the value of the naira compared to the dollar? And if you see how that value has eroded, you will see exactly how the purchasing power of Nigerians has also eroded. My organization did a back of the envelope calculation of how much the 2024 budget is worth compared to the 2023 budget. And though it's in, the 20s trillions, it's actually less than the 2023 budget in dollar terms. So, I hear things like, oh, states are receiving more from federal allocation. Yeah, that's true. What really is the value of that naira? And this is why you have an NLC and a TUC that will propose a 615,000 naira minimum wage. Mind you, that is a proposal. At the end of the day, a tripartite committee is meant to be formed that will consist of labor, the federal government, and experts that will advise the parties involved on what a reasonable minimum wage, is meant to be. There are also standard global best practices that will dictate just what goes into the minimum wage calculation, and the inflation rate is actually one of those considerations. So this calls for a better enhanced management of the products of the economy. Government needs to see the business of running the government something that should be transparent, that should be accountable, that should be efficient, that should be effective. Money spent should be valued and assessed. Projects that are implemented should be carried out in the mind that they are meant to serve and also, attain a value from money. And the revenue sources also need to be picked up in terms of our oil regime. With the introduction or with the removal of subsidies, has there been more investment in the petroleum industry? Have we been producing more in terms of per day? These are questions that need to be answered before we can say that inflation, before we can say that the macroeconomy is being handled, in a much better fashion. You also talked about the issue of. Sorry, I think I lost my train of thought. What was the third thing?
Okay, there are about three things: minimum wage, tariffs, and of course, purchasing power. Yes, those are the three things. So I think you've touched on
purchasing
tariffs.
power, and this, I guess this could even wrap up. Yes. Yes,
Go
I think
ahead.
this could even wrap up the conversation. Purchasing power is directly related to the inflation level, is directly related to the way the economy is being run. Your manufacturing sector, your extractive sector, your services sector, agriculture, how are these sectors being enhanced in terms of labor productivity, in terms of infrastructural supports, both roads, telecommunications, energy, how have these things been improved to ensure that you have a return in terms of increased GDP? And, this calls for harmonization of infrastructure policy, for instance, between the states and the federal government. I like to say this where I can, that at least 60% of federal roads are tarred, but the same cannot be said of state roads and even local government roads. And for a country that wants to take agriculture very seriously, most of our farms are in the local areas, which have roads that need to be tarred, which have roads that need to be improved, which have roads that need to be linked to state roads and then to federal roads. What are citizens doing? What type of questions are we asking state governors in terms of, road infrastructure, for instance? And then energy, like I spoke of before, these are things that enhance and ensure that when businesses want to invest, there is an already existing infrastructure. And when businesses can invest and, reap profits, they pay more taxes. And, this speaks to also the personal income taxes being paid by citizens, even at the state levels. CIT, all forms of taxes can be enhanced. You can get more taxes, really, when your economy is run, infrastructure is supplied, when security is optimal. But, it's unfortunate. These are conversations that we continue to have, and we really do not see a sense of cohesion in terms of how the states and the governments collaborate to provide infrastructure, to provide security, and to assure that, that their states and the federal economy is run optimally.
I must thank you so much for your time. I'm happy we could make do what we have. Senior Research and Policy Analyst, Budget Nigeria, Mr. Wala Kwaga. Thank you so much. Let me allow you get back to your training and meeting session. I really appreciate this. Enjoy your weekend.
Thank you for having me, Tony.